Good morning, everyone, on this snowy January day. Bonjour à tous et toutes. My name is Min Kai Trin. I am your host today, and I serve as a board member of the Canadian Institute for Procurement and Material Management. We also have Caroline Landry, a colleague and CIPMM VP here, who will jump in case some technical issues occur and I am disconnected from this session. Thanks, Caroline. I am delighted to welcome all of you joining us today for our second roundtable of the 25-26 series focused on professional services procurement. Bienvenue à notre deuxième table ronde aujourd'hui sur l'acquisition des services professionnels. As we gather virtually, we acknowledge that our event today takes place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We honor their enduring presence and contributions and invite everyone to reflect on the lands from which you are joining. In making this acknowledgement, we reaffirm our commitment to fostering respectful relationships and advancing reconciliation. Alors que nous nous réunissons virtuellement aujourd'hui, nous reconnaissons que notre événement se déroule sur le territoire traditionnel et non cédé de la nation Anishinaabe algonquine. Nous honorons leur présence continue et leur tradition et nous invitons chacun à réfléchir au territoire où vous vous joignez à nous. Par cette reconnaissance, nous réaffirmons notre engagement à favoriser les relations respectueuses et à faire progresser la réconciliation. I'd like to take a moment to mention that our panel is happy to respond to your questions and comments in either of our Canada's official languages. Please feel free to interact with our moderator and panelists in the language of your choice. This session is also being recorded and it will be made available on the CIPM website afterward for reference. Also, we are testing Wordly live translation and caption and would appreciate your feedback. For you to access it, participants can click the Wordly icon and select Wordly from the live drop-down menu in the top corner of the Zoom window, then choose the preferred language. Je voudrais prendre un moment pour mentionner que notre panel sera heureux de répondre à vos questions et commentaires dans l'une ou l'autre des langues officielles du Canada. N'hésitez pas à interagir avec le modérateur et les panélistes dans la langue de votre choix. Cette séance est également enregistrée et sera mise en ligne sur le site web de l'ICAGM par la suite pour votre référence. Aussi, nous testons la traduction et les sous-titres en direct de Wordly et apprécierons vos retours d'information. Pour y accéder, les participants peuvent cliquer sur l'icône Wordly et sélectionner Wordly dans le menu déroulant Live dans le coin supérieur de la fenêtre Zoom, puis choisir la langue de leur choix. Before we begin our panel, and today, we turn our attention to professional services procurement. I'd like to share some information about upcoming events with you. Please bring the CIPM slide up. As mentioned early on, in previous roundtable, this year's CIPM roundtable are the result of the collaborative effort between the Canada Revenue Agency, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Parts Canada, Share Service Canada, and Global Affairs Canada, as well as our team at CIPM. We are grateful to have such wonderful partners that allow CIPM to offer this roundtable to our PMM community. Please note that you will always be able to view our sessions that are recorded and put online, and all participants will obtain an email confirming their attendance to our roundtables. En plus des tables rondes, nous souhaitons également annoncer que le programme de mentorat de l'ICAGM 2026 est maintenant ouvert. Si vous êtes intéressé à devenir mentor ou à être mentoré, veuillez consulter le site web de l'ICAGM pour plus de détails. Je dois dire qu'ayant été mentor par le passé, j'ai trouvé l'expérience très enrichissante et j'espère avoir un grand nombre d'inscriptions, tant pour le mentorat que pour être mentoré. Maintenant, à propos du bénévolat avec l'ICAGM, notre organisation ne pourrait pas fournir des événements et des programmes de haute qualité sans l'aide de nombreux bénévoles, que ce soit en siégeant au conseil d'administration ou en aidant lors de l'un de nos événements. Faire du bénévolat avec l'ICAGM est donc une occasion de contribuer de manière significative à nos communautés, tout en réseautant avec des pairs et des leaders de l'industrie. Alors, we encourage you strongly to check opportunity to volunteer with CIPM. The last announcement is about our national workshop. So if you can please bring that slide up. The national workshop is scheduled for June 2 to 4 this year in Ottawa at our familiar venue, which is the Ottawa Conference and Event Center. We are also proud to announce that for this year, the Department of National Defense will be our premier partner. CIPIM has once again brought together a dedicated team working tirelessly to craft an impressive agenda that will be truly compelling for all of us. You can look forward to excellent topics covering both procurement and material management, along with passionate speakers, presenters, and panelists carefully selected for this event. Don't miss this opportunity for training, networking, and connecting with your peers and the PMM community. Please be sure to save the date. J'aimerais vous souligner que notre prochain atelier national aura lieu du 2 au 4 juin prochain à Ottawa dans notre lieu habituel, le Centre de conférences et d'événements d'Ottawa. Nous sommes également fiers d'annoncer que pour cette année, le ministère de la Défense nationale sera notre partenaire principal. Ne manquez donc pas cette occasion de formation, de réseautage et de moments privilégiés avec vos pairs et la communauté PMM. Veuillez donc réserver ces dates. I would strongly recommend you to scan the CPIM website to obtain the most recent updates regarding events and other opportunities from the Institute. Now, and finally, it is my pleasure to introduce you today to our moderator, Jean-Claude Hazard. Jean-Claude serves as Director General of the Finance and Administration Branch at the Canada Revenue Agency. He is one of the strongest advocates for our procurement and material management community and among the most respected leaders in the procurement field. We are truly honored to have Jean-Claude guiding this discussion today. J'aimerais vous présenter notre modérateur, Jean-Claude Hazard. Jean-Claude Hazard est le directeur général de la Direction générale des finances et de l'administration à l'Agence du revenu du Canada. Jean-Claude, c'est un plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui et de vous passer le microphone pour commencer cette table ronde. Merci encore.
Merci beaucoup, Minkai. Good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. Thank you so much for joining us. I see the number is climbing of participants. So let's jump into it directly. Federal professional services procurement is at a critical juncture. For those working on the ground, which is each one of you, this moment is not an abstract. It is showing up in heavier scrutiny, tighter controls, evolving policy direction, and real uncertainty about how to deliver results while managing risk and workload. It is not secret, recent audits, reviews, and subsequent action plans have raised legitimate questions about oversight, accountability, and public confidence. But they have also highlighted structural tensions contracting officers have been navigating for years. How to procure complex services in fast-moving environments, how to balance compliance with timeliness, how to exercise professional judgment in a system that increasingly rewards risk avoidance. Today's discussion is not about revisiting past decisions or second-guessing individual actions. It is about what this moment means for contracting officers now. What has already changed, what is still evolving, and where expectations are being recalibrated. Modernization is not a theoretical exercise. It affects how files are designed, how vendors are engaged, how risk is documented, and how much discretion contracting officers are trusted to exercise. I would encourage everyone in attendance today to engage with this conversation candidly, even where there is discomfort or disagreement. Stronger oversight and innovation are not mutually exclusive, but aligning them requires trade-offs, clarity, and sustained dialogue between policy leaders, operational teams, and industry. The objective today is practical clarity to help those delivering procurement day-to-day operations, which is you, better understand where the system is heading, what is expected of them, and how we collectively move forward under these new conditions. Joining me today is a panel of esteemed colleagues from PSPC, from TBS, as well as the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Each one of them bring a wealth of knowledge and make the conversation very exciting. I'm going to turn it over to them for a quick introduction before we start into the conversation, and we'll start with you, Emily.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Claude. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être ici aujourd'hui. Amélie Langlois. I am the Senior Director of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance at PSPC. I lead the office work to protect the integrity in the federal procurement, oversee the eligibility and suspension policy, and we help the register to take any decision with regards to misconduct and wrongdoing in the procurement environment. Thank you.
Bienvenue, Amélie. Joel, you're next.
Merci, Jean-Claude. Bonjour à tous. My name is Joel Heisey. I'm the Senior Director of Procurement and Material Policy at OCG at TBS. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Joel. Judith?
Merci, Jean-Claude. My name is Judith Rohrai. I am the Director of Professional Services Transformation and Partnerships at Public Services and Procurement Canada. Great to be here.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Last but definitely not least, Richard Kiefel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Kiefel. I'm a Senior Director for Strategic Planning. I work in the Chief Digital Officer sector at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, so a client to most of you. I provide the Office of the CIO type of support, which includes coordinating procurement, so that's why I'm here to speak to you today.
Welcome aboard, Richard. So in other words, Richard represents the business owners for us in the procurement community. So let's start with what really has changed. And my first question, it's not necessarily scripted. I'm going to direct it to certain panelists based on their background. But if anybody else would like to jump in, by all means, just let me know. So the first part is what really has changed. And this question is for Judith. What were the most systemic issues identified by the recent audit and procurement ombudsman reviews in the last few years?
Thanks for the question, Jean-Claude. So before I dive into some of the specific issues that were raised in the audits and reports, I think it's important to start by putting these findings in the proper context. All in all, Canada's federal procurement framework and PSPC's role as common service provider within it is widely regarded on the international scale as one of the most robust and well-designed in the world when the tenets of the policy are applied as intended. So the audits did not conclude that the policy framework was fundamentally flawed or that PSPC failed in our core role as common service provider. In fact, they largely found that PSPC performed its role as common service provider effectively by establishing, the appropriate instruments, so things like methods of supply, providing guidance, and enabling departments and agencies to procure professional services. Where the audits did surface issues, they were less about the design of procurement and more about how consistently that framework was applied in practice, particularly around the areas of planning, challenge, documentation, and oversight at the procurement file level. So in other words, the system worked when its disciplines were followed. Where outcomes fell short, it was most often because the disciplines eroded over time, especially in high pressure, high volume professional service environments. And of course, we know that the 5 years that were circumvented by the pandemic really did put a lot of extra pressure on the procurement community. And so the current reforms that we're seeing are not by any means a repudiation of the current system, but as Jean-Claude mentioned in his opening remarks, as a recalibration and reinforcing the fundamentals of good procurement judgment and accountability. And so the most systemic issues that were found in the audits and reviews are around 4 themes. The first was around an insufficient challenge function. So what do I mean by that? So procurement officers, often under a lot of pressure, accepted requirements at face value, even when they were repetitively vague and maybe poorly aligned to specific outcomes and results. So that was one theme. The second theme was a weak link between the requirement, scope, and value. So very often statements of work described activities rather than results. And amendments and extensions became the default mechanism to correct any kind of upstream planning gaps. The third area was the limited documentation of rationale. And so that's a theme that we're probably going to come back to a little bit later on in today's discussion. So decisions about procurement were more often than not reasonable, but they weren't recorded or papered in the procurement file, and making that accountability impossible after the fact to determine. And finally, there was an over-reliance on either a narrow set of suppliers or specific vehicles like TBIBs, for example. So speed, convenience, and familiarity gradually replaced competition, and in some cases, best value.
Thank you so much for this, Judith. For those of us who have been in the procurement business for a long time, documentation or lack of is something that recurs every decade when there's something involved in procurement. So there's definitely common themes there. And I do recall the Auditor General did say, there's no need for new rules. We have all the rules we need in Canada, which drives your point that we have a very good system in terms of procurement in Canada. So, Amélie, I wonder if you could tell us what changes to the federal oversight and accountability framework are helping to address these issues.
Merci, Jean-Claude. Like from a oversight perspective, like these recent audits really highlighted the systemic failure that happened in the system. Procurement was too reactive. There was a lack of transparency, lack of documentation, and also we struggled to detect fraud early. So PSPC response, like through fraud prevention, detection effort, and the launch of the office, it's directly targeting those issues that we've been facing in the recent years, and that was also discussed at the parliamentary committee appearances. The office is the government central authority for supplier integrity. We administer the ineligibility and suspension policy, which way more broader criteria now. Beyond criminal conviction, we now cover offenses like fraud, bribery, political financing, as well as similar provincial offices, and also foreign civil judgment. It means that not only we can act when a supplier has been debarred elsewhere, but also when doing business with them undermine public trust. And this is really important these days. With these tools, we have introduced provisional suspension. We can now debar up to 10 years. We have also administrative agreements. OSIC is way more equipped to faster result, proportionate ways to prevent misconduct, and not just react after the fact for the entire government of Canada. Parallèlement à la création du bureau SPAC, on met aussi en œuvre plusieurs améliorations clés en matière d'initiatives d'intégrité. We've deployed advanced data analytics to identify fraud pattern early, such as overbilling scheme. We all know what it's all about now, and we have taken corrective action measure in place, including suspending security clearances. We have also referred those cases to law enforcement. We have also introduced a restitution function that recovers funds when wrongdoing is confirmed, and to date we have recovered more than $4 million that were returned to the Crown, which is a significant effort. So with all those efforts, Jean-Claude, it is really data-driven detection, strengthen the OSIC system, active restitution, which means that PSPC is now shifting from a reactive approach to a more proactive approach. All that to in order to protect the public funds and rebuild the integrity in the federal procurement. It is so important these days.
Absolutely, Amélie, I couldn't agree more with you. We are at the end of the day a democracy. We also deal with public funds, and public trust is absolutely paramount in the procurement system. And globally, it is known that procurement is one of the areas, vulnerable areas, that are prone for fraud. So great work and great on the expansion of the mandate of the supplier integrity regime. Judith, I want to go back to you and expand a little bit, and maybe for the sake of the participant, what practice is no longer acceptable today that it used to be maybe a couple of years ago?
Okay, so I think most procurement specialists know what's not acceptable, but it's always worth underlying, Jean-Claude. So the first thing I would say is treating the procurement of professional services as a way to augment staff. And so that is no longer acceptable. There are tools for that, for pure staff augmentation, surge capacity, and so forth. But there are tools that are specifically not for that. And we've kind of created a little pattern of behavior to use some of the mandatory methods of supply as staff augmentation. So that is no longer acceptable. We need to do a little bit more work to really understand the requirement. The second thing I would say is approving vague statements of work with the expectation that we'll figure it out later, right? We'll just kind of slapdash our statement of work, be broad, right, and hope that we can kind of reconfigure later on. That's no longer acceptable. I would also say using amendments to redefine the scope. You need to really understand the scope a priori. And when we use amendments to redefine the scope, we're being non-competitive. We should be recompeting that requirement if there's a scope change. So that's the case in the project world, and it is the case in the procurement world as well. And finally, I would say proceeding without a clear audit trail that explains why a procurement approach was chosen. You know, in my opening remarks, I said that, you know, we are very strong in Canada with our community of practice in federal procurement. We need to be really proud about papering our rationales. You know, we need to procure quickly. We need to meet requirements. We have priorities to deliver, right? But we should be really proud at documenting our rationale to really show not only the Auditor General, but the public at large that we think things through. And we know that a lot of our procurements, the ones that were scrutinized by the audits and reviews, they were more exceptions, right? We're really good at doing this. So we just have to make that extra step to make sure that we're papering our rationale and that it's open to scrutiny, whether by the OAG or by a member of the general public. So I would say that those practices really are no longer acceptable.
Thank you, Judith. I've always said to my contracting officers going through the ranks is that when we draft a contract, we draft it for the lawyers and the judge to debate. So we have to tell a story. The file has to tell the story once we are long gone. So documentation absolutely is paramount, and empowering the officers to say no when they don't feel comfortable. I don't think we do that very much in the community. So what advice would you give to contract officer to differently now than what they used to do in the past?
That's a great question, Jean-Claude. Thanks for that. So you mentioned about that challenge function. Interrogate the requirement is what I would say, and not just the paperwork, not just the rec form, right? Just take some time to kind of ask the why behind the requirement. And procurement officers, are well within their remit to do just that. And I would say ask, what is the outcome you're actually buying, right? Are you buying labor hours? Are you buying a result? And that's how the procurement and the requirement has to be framed, is what is the result that Canada is buying? I would also say push back on any requirements that seem a bit open-ended or that are pooling resources to conveniently expedite future work. And pushing back is hard. I'm not underestimating the effort and the skill at doing that, but it'll be important going forward. And then finally, I would say to ensure that decisions especially if you're making any exceptions or amendments, are explicitly justified and documented in the procurement file. Just, even if it's a note to file, if you're making an amendment, or if you are granting an exception to one of the strengthened measures, for example, paper it. And by paper it, I mean include the justification in the procurement file so anyone looking in understands the rationale. And this isn't, I must stress to everyone here today, it's not about slowing down procurement. It's about making it defensible because the optics are really important. The public really put a lot of trust in us. And so we should be really proud when we're documenting files. It's not superfluous, right? It's what we do as public servants, and we're very good at doing that. So that, Jean-Claude, is what I think, a procurement officer should be focusing on these days.
Great advice, Judith. Thank you so much for this. Emily, what are your thoughts?
Oui, ben, en s'appuyant sur la perspective là, que Judith vient de mentionner, du point de vue de l'intégrité, pour nous, il existe aussi une autre dimension, tu sais, aux attentes que nous avons envers les agents de négociation de notre contrat. C'est pas seulement de remettre en question les exigences puis de documenter les décisions, c'est vraiment important, soit dit en passant, mais c'est aussi à propos de la vigilance puis de la responsabilité lorsque les risques apparaissent dans les différents processus. Tu sais. Officers today are expected to verify and document upfront, as Judith mentioned, but also escalate early if there's some issues. And like, I really want them to follow the see something, say something principle. It means for us, like reporting suspected wrongdoing to your supervisor, management with no delay, referring cases to us, to the office. And if you're not feeling comfortable doing all those steps, there's also the federal contracting fraud tip line that you can refer cases anonymously. So all these steps will ensure that integrity is protected and risks are identified early.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Emily. And you know what? I always refer to the procurement in the government as it's a chain, and we are as strong as the weakest link. So we all have to do our part in order for it to withstand public scrutiny and to be solid and strong. There's something Judith mentioned, it triggered something to me. It'll come back, but it'll come back. Richard, from a business owner's perspective, I mean, we've heard from PSPC, the common service provider, some of the changes impacting, the common method of supplies that we've as Judith mentioned, we've built a culture of using it and it was okay to use it. So from a business perspective, how are the changes most felt in approvals, timelines, expectations, dynamic relationship with the contracting officers? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, thanks. Honestly, I think actually we've seen a clear improvement of communications with our procurement colleagues between us and our business and how we work. What it's given us is a better understanding of timelines and process and expectations to manage that as well, because we've got to do that internally as well. On the other hand, there's the timesheets approval process, so that can't be signed by government employees now. That adds it makes more time consuming for the project authorities. And I think another little point that's easily not seen is like the added task of looking out for potential mistakes by vendors because of that, and so adapting to that.
So it's interesting because as contracting officers dealing with their clients, they always say, well, my client is frustrated, my client doesn't like that, we're increasing the timelines. Has the dynamic changed between the relationship dynamic between business owners from your perspective and your contracting officers? Have that changed? Is there any friction? Is it more collegial? Is it neutral? That impact?
Yeah, so between us and our procurement colleagues, our partners, we've fostered a good partnership, I think, here in DFO. Honestly, we're some surprise in like the level of support from our procurement colleagues, and just that better understanding that we have on Insight because of the collaboration in what they need, and they can also see on our side. So it really helps us to adapt to each other. in terms of the process overall, which we live together, there's a bit more, there's more paperwork, a little bit more burden because of that. Our experience before, we need our statement of work, our evaluation criteria, and our requirements checklist. Now we're adding in there's the digital questionnaire for us, some intake form, and all that type of thing. And I'll just add further, going back to our support from our procurement colleagues, is how they help us in working with PSPC as well, because often we do need to go PSPC CFO for certain authorities.
And was there anything the last couple of years that surprised you, that came as a surprise to you as a business owner? And I know, just for the sake of everybody else, you come from the CIO structure, so you are part of the Chief Information Officer within DFO. So obviously, IT procurement is something that you guys do on all the time. So what surprised you the most from all of those changes?
Going back to what surprised us the most, again, just the increased level of support that we got from our procurement team, that the partnership that they wanted to.
So that's a positive thing in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that goes back to the people that were and that willingness to support us in that way.
And has there anything in the relationship that breaks down? Like, did that impact the relationship negatively, if any?
It didn't impact our relationship negatively. It's kind of going through these, when you go through change, we went through it together. So experiencing that together reinforced the partnership we have.
So as a business owner, what advice would you give contracting officers listening to you right now?
Understand your business partner's business, have ongoing dialogue. We have bi-weekly dialogue with our procurement colleagues. Have that, because it's very helpful for us, and it's also helpful, I think, for our procurement colleagues.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Richard.
Oh, you're welcome.
So you're from TBS. Could you just speak to us a little bit? What did the audit reveal about the strength and limits of the policy framework?
Sure, thanks, Jean-Claude. D'abord, merci à nos participants. Like, there's over 300 folks online here today, so I just want to first say thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to us. I'm going to provide a short response, Jean-Claude, just because some of what I will say will be repetitive to the points that Judith has already made. Overall, some of the common themes from recent audits and reports or reviews is saying that the framework is generally sound. It's revealed that our current procurement policy framework has solid foundations. The OIG noted that federal procurement policies have clear principles, are well designed to promote fairness, transparency, and value for money. And the framework provides structured guidance and is principles-based, giving flexibility to meet the unique needs of different departments in terms of all the different types of procurements that they need to complete. In terms of limitations or weaknesses, I want to highlight 3 of the more common issues that have come up recently. So first is a little bit more tied directly to the policy framework itself, and that's lack of awareness or failure to adhere to procurement rules. So adherence to roles and responsibilities has regularly been flagged as an issue, specifically that there's not sufficient awareness or they're not being adhered to in instances where they are known. So part of our focus going forward, and I may speak to this a little bit later, has been trying to increase awareness of roles and responsibilities within our policy framework. There's also some common references to limitations that are less about the framework itself and more with respect to how we support the framework's application in actual practice. So 2 things that I'll note here that have been raised with some frequency, and Judith has already sort of poked at them. The first is inadequate record keeping. So the paper trail required by the Treasury Board policy suite was regularly missing or incomplete from a lot of the procurements that have been subject to audit and review recently. And the policy framework relies on the assumption that departments are going to maintain a complete audit trail, but the audits that we have seen recently reveal that when the basic hygiene of management or file management is ignored, the framework has no real built-in mechanism to automatically trigger a halt to spending. So that sort of points the gun a little bit more at the procurement management frameworks in departments. So our job internally is to help provide guidance to departments on how to beef up those performance management frameworks. And then lastly, another issue that is raised often is lack of vendor performance tracking. So a significant limitation revealed by the recent OPAL report was that there was an absence of robust government-wide vendor performance, a robust vendor performance management system, and this was allowing companies with questionable delivery track records or bait and switch practices to continue receiving contracts. So those last two are less about the policy framework itself and more about how it's being applied in practice.
Thank you, Joel. I think the lack of the policy awareness, especially when it comes to the roles and responsibilities, was very much highlighted in the last couple of years. And I remember, throughout the last couple of decades, everything used to be on the shoulders of the contracting officers. Well, there's any problem, officers should do this. This time around, we saw much more attention on the business owners. And in TBS, released the guide to the business owners. There was, an effort with the Canadian School of Public Service to deliver the training to business owners. So we saw the focus shifting not shoulders of the business owners, but from the offices, but also to the business owners. Let's shift a little bit now from the policy to the practice. Judith, I want to start with you. Which post-audit changes truly affect day-to-day procurement?
Okay, that's a great question. So I kind of spoke to them in my previous answers. I think the biggest post-audit change would be the stronger front-end planning expectations, which takes time. So we are seeing that more time is spent ensuring that the scope is aligned with specific outcomes and needs. Again, this is always part of the directive of procurement, but we didn't always spend enough time at that front end. So we're starting to see that happen now. We're starting to see that the expected results of the procurement are much clearer, and that we're even starting to see that KPIs are built into the solicitation before it goes out, before it's floated out to market, which is great. Another important change is we have less discretion to work around the established procurement vehicles. So you'll see, most of you will know, measures 1, 2, 3 really limit the value and duration of TBIBs, for example. And so we are looking to help departments transition to more outcomes-based models. So that's a big change. But what that's doing is it's driving more consistency across departments and agencies when they provide us with their requirements. So we're really seeing that change in action. And finally, the other change that has had the biggest, I would say, operational impact from a day-to-day procurement is the increased scrutiny on amendments, on contract amendments. And so these amendments trigger bigger questions about planning, quality of management, for example, and as well as the reliance on specific external resources. And so that's engendering a lot of change. And those are the three main areas that we're starting to see are having the biggest operational impacts.
And I mean, the 10 key changes, that got implemented, they generated lots of debate across procurement community. And some were with, some were against, some did not understand, why these changes. So obviously, as we mentioned, this is a cultural change. The old paradigm is no longer here. So the adaptation is absolutely paramount to push, to increase, to tighten the existing paradigm or the framework. Amélie, what do you think? What's, from your perspective, what are the hardest changes to operationalize?
Merci, Jean-Claude. Generally speaking, we all know that when it comes to change in federal oversight and accountability, it is very hard to operationalize in a decentralized procurement environment. Fragmented processes, uneven oversight, siloed data makes it very difficult to ensure consistency across different organization, sector, branches. For us, for OSIC, it means translating the government-wide requirements, like the eligibility and suspension policy, into day-to-day operation. And we have more than 100 departments and agencies. So you can see how an enterprise it is for us to do that, but we're making some great progress. I have also to mention that like implementation for us, it's difficult because of the awareness of OSIC authority is uneven. Data access is also constrained. There's no one financial system across the government, no one like procurement system either. There's like enforcement really remain fragmented. So with no common data, no standard, and an enterprise-wide approach, detection and deterrence are very limited. So that's really like our challenge. The good news is that we have policies in place. We have commitments under the Procurement Improvement Action Plan to really integrate those procurement governance, and that will help overcome the challenge over the next couple of months and years.
Absolutely. I want to shift the gear a little bit. I'm just mindful of the time. I want to cover as much ground as possible. So we spoke about the policy, we spoke about the practice. Let's move to the modernization and the controls. So I'm going to go back to you, Judith. How do the recent changes and that PSPC put forward align with the procurement modernization, and whether do they even align with the procurement modernization?
That's the hard question, Jean-Claude, but we're happy to answer. So from PSPC's perspective, we're committed to modernizing our processes so they become simpler, more streamlined, less onerous, while ensuring best value for Canadians and providing opportunities for more suppliers. So really kind of making sure that we remain competitive. That's a lot to ask. We do that pretty well, despite having a system that in many instances might be complex. But we're looking to leverage tools such as AI, maybe even potentially a digital marketplace, for example, to make that burden on procurement officers much reduced. And so we do have tools at our disposal, but they're not necessarily going to be implemented in the near or medium term, just because procurement is so complex. And as Amélie alluded to, we are decentralized here in Canada, which has its advantages too. And so also from our perspective at PSPC, the recent changes, namely the strengthened measures for professional services, we see these as prerequisites for transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to really modernize our procurement practices, it's important at the outset to improve how we define our needs when we're seeking external expertise. It's important that we have strong governance when we do seek that support from outside government, and be consistent in our practices across government. And so we can help support TBS in that, as in our role as common service organization. We also need to ensure that we do not create dependencies with specific suppliers. This is really important because, I mentioned public perception. It's really important. And there might be very good reasons, right, to kind of opt for certain suppliers over others. We just need to make sure that it's governed, well documented, with a strong rationale and justification. And really just to support our overarching policy goals. And this also includes increasing diversity of bidders, right? So, 2-3 bids, that is not good enough. So we really have to understand our market And Joel mentioned vendor performance management. So the good news is that we have a framework in place. It's in its early stages, but vendor performance management is here to stay. It's a best practice we see across the world in other jurisdictions, as well as here in Canada at the provincial level. And the goal of vendor performance management isn't to punish suppliers for not performing. It's really to raise standards and to have those kind of regular discussions at important milestones with our suppliers to make sure that we're raising standards, that they are able to deliver the outcomes that we're expecting and really improve the performance of procurement overall.
You know, you said so many things that I would love to unpack and deep dive in, like, you know, public perception that triggered what I was going to say before. It still stuck with me. We know in Canada we say you're innocent until proven guilty, but that doesn't apply when you are in the public service. Perception is absolutely important, and we have to deal with it as if it was reality. In the current timelines, you know, with the geopolitical situation, dependency on vendors is not in our best interest. Diversity of the vendors is absolutely paramount. And when I remember when I was, you know, a junior PG, those who trained used to say, well, we don't have teeth. You know, we can't go after any vendor, so we don't have anything. But it's no longer the case. Now we are living up. We are holding them to standards. And I like what you said. It's not about punishing them. It's about holding them to standards. We're paying you. It's taxpayers' money from the CRA, so taxpayers is very important. And we hold you accountable for every single penny, and we're not going to turn a blind eye anymore. We talk about modernization. Modernization is not one activity and then stop. It's a continuum. And I know PSPC started on this journey in 2016, way before, but it took more formal, cachet to it in 2016. And so, as an officer, if it's wrong to think that we're just stopping right now, or those 10 measures are it. I'm seeing you nodding, so we're expecting more changes, more transformation. And when we talk about digital, or as Emily was talking about, fraud, we can't detect fraud if we don't know, if we don't have a line of sight. So shying away from the paper record, as Richard here graciously put in the chat, toward more digitals, to more tools, to more integrated tools, to possibly using AI to expedite this. Those are building blocks that's going to really make the modernization more efficient, more effective, and give the officers more tools to handle that. To Richard, I want to go to, not Richard, sorry, Joe, I want to go to you, not off the hook. From a TBS perspective, and given the recent audit findings, how is the Secretariat strengthening accountabilities and compliance frameworks to ensure professional services procurement aligns with established policies?
Sure, thanks, Jean-Claude. I'll run you through some of the things that we've done in recent years, but first I'll say that the issues that have been highlighted recently through audits and reviews aren't new to us. These have largely been known, and we've been working to address them for a number of years. And we've been doing that, been working to strengthen the accountability and compliance through two general approaches. So the first is regularly reviewing, updating, and modernizing our policy suite. And then secondly, looking at measures that increase oversight. So I'll start first with strengthening managerial accountability within our policy suite. And I'll go back to something that you had mentioned, Jean-Claude, that the AG had said. And this is a direct quote from a recent audit, and it's, "I don't believe the government needs more procurement rules. It needs to follow the ones that it has." So we have made changes to our directive on the management of procurement in recent years that are meant to increase accountability and oversight measures. And they have been done to fill in some gaps, but in a large part, the changes that we have made have been about bringing clarity and precision and better guidance and direction to users of our directive. It hasn't necessarily been about addressing major gaps and adding more rules. It's more about clarification and making sure that everybody understands what our directive is saying as a standalone piece without having to come to us for advice. So Some of the changes we've made with respect to accountability in the directive, October 2023, we published the Manager's Guide, Key Considerations when Procuring Professional Services, to support managers in making a decision on whether to procure services or use internal resources. The guide provides support in deciding to procure, how to structure the procurement and managing the procurement following contract award. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that guide and hopefully rely on it when you're procuring professional services. Second notable thing that we've done in May 2024, in response to reports from the OAG and the Procurement Ombud, we added mandatory procedures for business owners to our directive. So these are mandatory procedures to be followed when procuring professional services, and they provide details on the responsibilities of business owners and outline requirements to document, maintain, preserve, and provide all relevant records to contracting authorities. So a lot of what we've done there is about trying to make very clear in our directive that business owners have accountabilities and responsibilities as well, and that business owners and contracting authorities really need to see themselves as a team and work collaboratively. They bring different elements to the table, but they both contribute to compliance, to oversight, and making sure that there's accountability. Thirdly, I'll point out that in just this last year, we published a guide on mitigating conflicts of interest in procurement, again, to help business owners, contracting authorities understand and fulfill their conflict of interest obligations throughout the procurement process. So these measures are a combination of as I said at the top, both buttressing existing policy and filling in gaps, but also providing additional tools, guidance, resources to give business owners the clarity that they need to understand, not just understand their roles, but then actually apply them. And then the second theme that I wanted to talk about in terms of changes is increased oversight measures. So we've also taken measures to help close accountability gaps, not just implementation gaps. So the directive has been amended to further strengthen oversight, conflict of interest, and integrity provisions. And I'll just highlight a few of the ones that we've done recently. So there's a new requirement for SDOs of procurement to provide deputy heads with reports twice a year about the number of consultants associated with business activities, informatics services, management consulting services, and temporary help within the department. We also updated business owners' responsibilities to clarify that the values and ethics code for the public sector and the directive on conflict of interest apply at all times during the procurement process, including when evaluating bids and awarding and managing contracts. We've expanded contracting authorities' responsibilities to include the prevention and identification of conflicts of interest. And finally, we've included a requirement that business owners are identified and documented in the contract. So this sort of speaks to some of the results that we saw through ArriveCan audits, where I think one of the observations was that departments were sort of pointing the finger at each other. Nobody really knew who was ultimately accountable for the procurement process. So we've put measures in there to make sure that it's very clear who the primary business owner is and what their roles and responsibilities are. And just finally, to summarize, like the why behind these changes, the goal is really about, again, like I said, not about adding rules to our framework. It's about trying to instill a culture of compliance from design rather as compliance as an afterthought. So we often get tied up in, pushing the procurement file forward and then, making sure that our client gets what we want. And then there's the afterthought is on the compliance and whether we have met our roles and responsibilities. We want that to be built in from the very beginning of the process. We want compliance to be part of what business owners and contracting authorities do as part of their day-to-day job and every task that they do.
You said also lots of things that I would like to delve into, but we will not have necessarily the time for right now. We connect later on. Something I mentioned early on in my opening remarks, and then Judith touched base on it a little later. And I think from the procurement officers, I can hear them saying, well, every time there's an audit, every time there's a crisis, every time there's something, we put the brakes on everything and we go back to become a risk averse. The environment is so changing around us. Technology is changing around us. The world is changing around us. The world pre-pandemic doesn't exist anymore. And, we talk about outcome-based procurement, risk-based approach. Is even risk-based something that is doable in the federal procurement? And if so, how can we enforce it? How can we foster it? How can we nurture it, even from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I said it off the top, like the OAG had sort of said, like one of the strengths of our policy suite is that it's flexible, it's principles based, it's not prescriptive like previous policies. So it's designed in a way to provide guardrails as wide as possible while ensuring the integrity of procurement processes and compliance. And that's meant to give not only deputy heads, but contracting authorities and business owners the latitude that they need to get the services and goods that they need through procurement. So we've been taking an approach that is about trying to provide as much flexibility as possible, while at the same time providing very clear guidance on, what is allowable and what is not allowable. So the focus has really been on deputy head accountability, ensuring that procurement management frameworks are developed within departments in a way that are reflective of the risk levels of the types of procurement that department does. So like PMFs should be scalable in terms of what they require internally, based on the types of procurements that a department is undertaking. So for smaller departments doing lower level, lower value procurements and maybe not high volume, the procurement management framework should be, greatly reduced relative to, say, a D&D who's doing billion-dollar procurements that are very complex. And while they may have significant maturity there, we still likely need greater guardrails to make sure that things are done above board. But at the end of the day, our objective is to enable risk-based procurement as much as possible. And when I say that, I just mean have as much flexibility to pursue what they need in the ways that we need. I'll say, I can't say too much at this point, but we're actively looking at ways to combine procurement regulations. Like we've the work that we're doing with PSPC to develop harmonized procurement regulations is out there in the public. It's part of our commitments as part of red tape reduction exercises. And part of what we're doing in that review is looking at ways that we can change procurement regulations to provide greater flexibility to departments. And that's really all I can say on that at this time, but it is something that we certainly have an eye on, and it has been the framework with which we have approached the revised directive and changes that we've been making, or amendments that we've been making to it since it was stood up.
Thank you so much, Joel, for this. I'm not sure, Judith, Emily, do you have anything to add on the culture, the risk-based culture change or
I think, Jean-Claude, we talk a lot about risk-based and flexibility, and I'm all for that. So I started my career in the private sector, and 10 years into the public sector, I understand why we are risk adverse, right? We want to do the right things. Whether we do things right is another question, but there's always going to be a level of due diligence that we need to apply, because we are protecting the interests of Canadians. And so, like Joel said, it's about finding the right balance. But risk aversion, it has a negative connotation. I don't see it as negative. I see it as we're protecting the public purse. And so there's always going to be a level of that. We're not supposed to be as agile as banks and insurance companies, right? Our bottom line is how safe and what value we bring to Canadians. So that would be my personal opinion on that.
Thank you so much, Judith. So I think we are at the 1 hour mark, and I know we have 11 questions here, and then we have lots of comments in the chat. So before we move to the questions, I just want to give an opportunity for our panelists just to give me maybe in one sentence, what mindset shift matters most going forward, in your opinion? We'll start with you, Judith, since we have you on screen.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. I would say the mindset is to try to shift towards an outcomes or results mindset. And that's a big ask because, the mandatory methods of supply have been around since 1998. That's more than a quarter of a century. And so it's kind of, they've dictated our behaviors, and for good reason. And so it's no secret that we're looking to put in place a more streamlined, modern set of tools. But the premise really is that, or the prerequisite rather, is that we move our mindset towards solutions, outcomes, performance, right? Those terms are actually not interchangeable. Outcomes means that we're buying a result rather than time, right? Or bodies or labor hours. We really are buying a result. And so PSPC, with the help of TBS, we're putting together some tools or making some investments to really help the community, move towards that mindset. It's a tall order. As I said, it's a cultural shift. I see a lot of comments in the Q's and A's and in the chat about, that cultural shift, but we're more than capable of doing it. It'll take time, so we have to manage expectations with our with deputy heads, ADMs, DGs, and so forth, because it will take time if it's done well. But that's definitely where I see the biggest shift happening.
Thank you so much, Judith. Emily, same question. What mindset shift matters most going forward, in your opinion?
To me, I would like that everybody comes back and recognize that the integrity is no longer just a PSPC responsibility, but I would like to treat that as a shared and enterprise-wide obligation that every procurement decision should be actively prevent, detect, and respect wrongdoing, and that what will bring the trust back into the system.
Thank you so much, Emily. And actually, there's a saying in the world of security in the government, security is everybody's business. Integrity is everybody's business as well. Everybody is involved. Thank you so much. Joel, same question. From TBS, what mindset shift matters most going forward?
I think I've already said it, but I'll repeat it. Compliance by design. We need to shift our mindset into ensuring that we're giving consideration to compliance, procurement rules and regs every step throughout the procurement process. So there's lots of resources that TBS has available to help with that, but that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you so much, Joel. So now we're going to go to the questions. We'll start with the questions in the Q&A. So far we have 14, out of which 2 have been answered. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. How have organizational cultures across the Government of Canada contributed to criticisms of the Government of Canada purchasing? And how should organizational culture across the GC shift to positively address those criticisms? Who's brave enough to take this one out? And I'm not sure if actually the organizational culture contributed to the criticism. So I'm just...
I can have a go, Jean-Claude. I think one thing, my observation is that, it's only when things go wrong that we end up up in parliamentary committees, right? And having to kind of defend our practices. There isn't really a platform or a forum where we can kind of, other than maybe on Canada.ca, that really kind of share our successes and, the 99% of things that go right. And so that's not a PSPC problem to solve, but I think it's, definitely an enterprise-wide issue that should be looked at. My team does a lot of international benchmarking. We do a lot of research, right? And so one thing I've discovered, everyone's looking at what we're doing, right? So we're looking across and everyone's like, well, what's Canada doing? Because obviously they're going to be the best at it, right? And I don't ever listen, I don't hear that in parliamentary committees or in CTV news and whatnot. So I think we could do more to promote all the great work and the rules that we do follow, and they're amongst the most robust in the world. When you think of Canada, you don't think of corruption, right? You think of too many rules and a lot of oversight, right? But there are clear benefits to that. So I don't know what the solution is, but I know from my perspective, when I'm meeting with stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, I tend to underline the great work that we do. And if we all do more of that, we might see a little bit of a cultural shift.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judith. Happy to hear Joel say the framework is sound and Judith is saying the system works when process is followed. Can we or should we expect more compliance audits to make sure process and framework is understood and followed? And will there be any consequences if tools aren't used properly? So maybe on the tools, maybe this is where PSPC would be coming in, and I'm not sure about the framework if TBS would have anything. So
thanks. I don't work in the audit world, so I can't opine on that. I can say that I have seen through our internal audit group here at TBS that there are other procurement related horizontal audits that are underway. They are rather focused, I'll say that. And for those of you who know what I'm speaking of, you've likely been tapped by our internal audit services folks for a chat. We've also at TBS put in place recently the risk and compliance process, which is meant to replace the old management accountability framework. I think just saying that leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but the intent of the RCP, the risk and compliance process, is about, again, reaffirming deputy head accountability for everything that falls under their responsibility. And one of the lines of inquiry within the RCP on an annual basis is a set of 10 questions that relate to procurement. So rather than going through a process where we're actively auditing, and I shouldn't say we, but TBS is definitely part of that, but where compliance with policy frameworks are actively being audited, there's this measure through RCP that is a measure of sort of proactive, audit compliance, and it's done on an internal basis. So what that does is the results give deputy heads and folks within a department a sense as to where they have issues and may need to address things. And then it also gives the Treasury Board Secretariat a window into the things that are going on into departments and areas that we may want to push on a little bit more. So it would inform things for us, like providing comments and guidance on a department's forward-looking internal audit plan, right? So we may suggest to them as a result of the RCP that they look at particular areas of compliance relative to our framework. But in terms of whether I have awareness of an intent to increase internal audits going forward, I really can't speak to that.
Thanks, Joel. And before I turn it to Judith about the, from a tools perspective, audits on the tools, I can tell you that from here at the CRA, we've been under ongoing different exercises of internal audits as well as internal controls since 2022 or 2023, sorry. And I have to say, while they may seem lots of work and they may seem somebody else is putting their nose in your business, I look at them, and this is an opportunity to push forward things we wanted to change, some modernization, some highlighting some of the things we wanted to do, but we weren't able to do before because we were not a priority. So my officers always hear me say, this to me screams job security. That's number one. And second, all the changes that we want to push forward, that we know based on experience we want to bring forward, but nobody listens because why change something when there's no attention to it? Those are opportunities to affect the change we want to bring. Judith, over to you from a tools perspective. Is PSPC, envisioning more audits on the use of the tool, and will there any be consequences of misusing those tools?
So, the strengthened measures we're not there to police their application, because one thing we do know is that procurement folks want to apply the rules. We know that a priori. So we're not going to go and police it. We're just going to, quietly advise that your procurement files be audit proof, right? That is basically the job of a bureaucrat, is to make sure that anything withstands scrutiny. What we do pledge to do is to provide more guidance, and Joel really kind of underlined the theme of clarity, right? So we will come out with more guidance on the application of the strengthened measures, more guidance around the application or the use of our methods of supply. We also pledge, I have a whole team that's dedicated to reaching out to the internal stakeholder communities, to clients and departments, to understand their struggles with our tools, right? Before we do anything, before we transform anything, right, or reform anything, we need the procurement community's perspective, and that will be important. So you'll see a lot more engagement in 2026. We are looking to clarify, and we're looking to really understand barriers. And so, and I hope that, the results will follow.
Thank you so much, Judith. I'm looking at the chat, and there's a question from Heather I would like to pose, from Heather Ross. It's common knowledge that there is already a severe lack of experienced PGs in the government of Canada, which will become more of a challenge given the GC's downsizing plan happening right now, and if I might add, the early retirement incentive. If the expectation is to focus on shifting to results outcome versus just get it done quickly, this takes time and manpower. How is it possible to accomplish this when most departments don't have the staff capacity? So I'm going to start, given that I'm also in operating departments, give some time to my colleague panelists. So Heather, this is what keeps me at night as an executive, thinking about the current environment, the changes, the reductions, the plans. So I fully agree with you. I know that the PG community has been in shortage since I joined the government, as long as I can remember. So we've never been at capacity. I think what we need to start thinking about is not doing same with less, let alone more with less. We need to change the way we do. And when you put it in the context of the major transformation this current government is talking about, introducing some of the tools that help us expedite some of the digital avenues, some of the, getting rid of the paper. We talked about you can't monitor what you don't see. And if you're holding a paper in your drawer, nobody else can see it. How can you do vendor performance if you're just sticking your performance and not sharing it with with the rest of the government of Canada? So it is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to change the way we do rather than trying to do the same, let alone more, with less people.
I'll just jump in and add one more maybe elephant in the room. So we are looking across to other jurisdictions, and in particular down south, the General Services Administration, and over in the UK, at their equivalent of the federal level, they're heavily leveraging AI. And so, and they're leveraging AI in a way that basically sits on their existing systems and is able to glean and compile that business intelligence, Jean-Claude, that you're speaking of. So, as long as there's a digital footprint of, for example, the procurement file, AI can actually, bring all of that information together to help the procurement community make informed decisions. And so I think that, it's likely that Canada's heading in the same direction. How and where, I don't know. But it's something that I'm sure is being scrutinized at the moment. I often share this example at these types of fora. But I have a family member who works for a large multinational who's now very heavily leveraging AI. And, the fear was that that jobs would be lost, but that is the complete opposite. The company is able to make more money and therefore hire more people and generate more profits. What does that look for, like in Canada's perspective? Well, we can deliver more benefits and services to Canadians, right? And so I think that AI should be seen as a tool that will leverage, right? Better delivery, better service delivery, and a more streamlined approach to how we manage procurements. Because, I'm seeing in a lot of comments and chats and the questions that it is very complex for procurement officers who basically deserve a law degree after, a career in procurement in Canada, right? It's highly complex. And I do think that AI can really help us decomplexify, simplify while remaining compliant and providing best value.
Thank you so much for this, Judith. There's two questions. So there was an important point made about buying for results versus buying activities. And I think this is what you said, outcome versus, what's outcome, buying results as opposed to buying time, in order to ensure accountability and value. Yet I don't see anything in the strength and measures on this. Your thoughts on that?
Okay. So in fact, measures 1 through 3, so capping the upper limit of a TBIBS, for example, or any kind of time-based contracting models, the duration. So for example, a TBIPS and a TSPS task are now capped at 2 years, including option years. And finally, limiting amendments. So those 3 measures are really forcing procurement teams to look at an alternative vehicle. And the alternative vehicles available would be solutions or outcomes-based vehicles like TSPS solutions and SBIBs, for example. Very difficult. It's not easy to kind of change the mindset or to have, like a 180 shift. We understand. And important to underline here, there will always be a need for TBIBs or TSPS task type vehicles, right? They do serve a purpose. But when you have a longer term requirement that spans beyond 2 years and beyond 20 million and has some unknowns, right? So you don't necessarily understand the full scope when you're going out with your solicitation. That's where an outcomes-based model fits in because it provides that flexibility. There are no caps in value. There are no caps in duration. The trick is really in developing a statement of work that's broad enough, right, to allow for an iterative or agile procurement, but also has, right, some embedded guardrails and fail safes to make sure that we're getting value for money. This is a lot to ask. But it's those 3 measures really that are there to help force that shift, as it were.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this, Judith. So there's a question that really goes to, I think, to something that Joel had said. So the moderator encouraged a candid discussion, and Joel's comment regarding DNP and principle-based directive resonates. Can you share views, thoughts on procurement teams who risk manage their procurements by aligning with DNP in light of PSPC measures and recommendations?
Jean-Claude, I'll try and provide a response, but I'm sorry, I missed the last part of the question. I'm looking for it in the chat. I don't.
It's an anonymous attendee from 101.
There we go. Well, I'm not quite sure how to interpret this, Jean-Claude, to be honest. So teams who risk manage their procurements by aligning with the directive in light of PSPC measures and recommendations. I'm not quite sure I understand what is meant by risk manage the procurements by aligning with the directive. If they mean if they mean that they are using the flexibilities within the directive to take an approach that may be riskier than they would otherwise have to, I'm not sure necessarily that that conflicts with measures and recommendations from PSPC. That's how I'm interpreting this question, but I'm not certain, so I'm sorry. I would say that PSPC and TBS, our OCG, are in almost daily contact between strategic policy branches and OCG to talk these sorts of things through. So I think there is a high level of alignment between our sort of horizontal policy framework and then the operational policies that PSPC puts in place. But if there are specific instances where PSPC rules are sort of bumping up against our directive, I'd be very interested in sort of hearing more about what those issues are that you're running into. And again, that's how I'm interpreting the question. So I apologize if I'm not quite getting it on the mark, but you can certainly follow up with me by email. And if there are issues that you want to point out specifically, I'd be happy to hear about them.
Thank you, Joel. We're going to move to another question from an anonymous attendee. I'm not sure if this is the same person. With new rules, new measures, new templates, my team has a hard time keeping up, and I feel at risk of complaints and non-compliance. Agree with holding vendors accountable to higher standards. How can I hold my procurement team to higher standards to ensure a defendable process and outcome and avoid complaints? Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I'll have a go. So, you know, I fully recognize the challenges. You know, we have the same challenges as at PSPC, whether we're buying for ourselves or whether we're procuring on behalf of departments and agencies. And we spoke about early on, I think it was Joel that mentioned the importance of the collaboration with the business owner, right? I think the business owner wants to deliver on priorities, but they don't want to break any rules. If they understand the rules, right, and the confines of what we do as a procurement community, I think that we'll get greater buy-in. So when they're fashioning their requirements, right, they have to understand how we procure, right? And not just say, buy this because I need it, right? It's the how that matters. And so if we can bring business owners to a higher level of awareness about what procurement actually means and how it's a strategic lever for government, right? And not just a means to an end, we might have a higher chance of having those rules be adhered to with less friction. That's what I would say. What I'm developing, the idea I'm developing here is tough. You know, again, on the business owner side, they have policy imperatives. They want to deliver on high priorities. And so that's totally understandable. So I do see that we have an era where we can collaborate more fully with our business owner community and bring them along the journey, which doesn't just start with a rec form, right? It starts in really understanding their needs, but also understanding what the market is capable of delivering, right? And maybe, you know, kind of understanding we have 87 vendors that could potentially deliver on this requirement. A successful procurement looks like having 50% of them bid, right? So what kind of incentives can we put into our solicitation to make sure that we're getting the right vendor at the right price that's able and likely to give us the right results? So there's a lot there, but I do think that we are entering into that area of opportunity to have that more meaningful collaboration with business owners.
Absolutely. And you know what? I could not agree more with what you said. And if I may add a couple of things, I'd like for our attendees, if they can leave with something today, there's a shift in the federal government in this community from being a simple transactional officers that do push paper and do a transaction to a strategic. And I don't like to refer to as contracting officers as much as procurement officers. Because the contracting, when you refer to the contract, is just the transaction itself. But a procurement officer is somebody who takes into account, who thinks about the industry, the market, the vendor, the capacity, the policy framework, today's need versus the long-term need at the sustainability for the organization, the return on the investment, the minister's mandate. This a major shift from being just a paper pusher to a strategic ally to business owner. And when you start thinking this way, automatically your team is already working with high standards, is building relationship with your business owners, being able to challenge them in a robust methodological and scientific way and getting a much better outcome. So it's a shift in culture from a contracting officer just to push paper, complete templates and send it, to actually being able to design the whole procurement from A to Z. All right, so we're almost at time. I mean, my goodness, I can't believe it's been almost 90 minutes conversation. Obviously, we are all passionate executives in this community. We are working towards the same goal, despite the challenges and everything. And Judith, you said something, like the difference between an opportunity and obstacle is our attitude towards it. Yes, it's true, the last few years have been tough for all of us, but there's good coming out of that. It's the changes, it's the push towards a more modern system, a more sustainable system, a more comprehensive and integrated system. I really want to take some time from closing before I turn it to Minkai, and I want to thank each and every one of the panelists. I know that Richard had to leave us, but thank you all for your candid, participation, for grounding this discussion in real experience, each from your different perspective. I think the message today is very straightforward. Professional services procurement is changing, and modernization will only be credible if it results in clearer expectations, workable tools, and defensible decision for practitioners that are under scrutiny. I am convinced there is no return to the old way of doing business. The old world doesn't exist anymore. Progress now depends on translating policy intent into day-to-day practice, being honest about trade-offs, and supporting professional judgment where it is expected. And I think it's an invitation to all of us to work collectively together, whether we are policy, whether we are common service provider, business owner, stakeholder, for really the success of this community and for the new world and the new way of doing business. With this, I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, and thank you for being with us today. Minkai, I'll turn this to you.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Claude. I see you're right, 90 minutes well spent, and we're approaching 1 p.m. Acknowledging that many of you have commitments right after. It's a busy time of the year for sure. I will keep this brief. So a big thank to you, and a big round of applause to Jean-Claude, our moderator, and to all our panelists, Joe, Judith, Amélie, and Richard, for sharing such inspiring and insightful perspective today. And thank you all for your presence and engagement. There were so many important points and good info shared by our attendees that we need to recognize. So on behalf of CIPIM and our panel, wishing you a wonderful day and an excellent year 2026. It's not too late to say Happy New Year. We're half through January. So, nos meilleurs vœux pour une excellente année 2026 et au plaisir de vous revoir bientôt. Bonne journée.